At 79, Sally Field finally reveals the truth about Robin Williams. They once shaped a film that felt warm and familiar to millions, stepping into roles that let their artistry shine. Robin threw himself into every moment on set, shifting effortlessly into that quirky older nanny who tried to stay close to his children, while Sally carried the weary resolve of a woman trying to hold her family together. Their chemistry felt natural, and that connection stayed alive in the memories of viewers for decades. But the world never truly saw what unfolded when the cameras were down. Behind that celebrated production lived a quieter story, one that held far more weight than the surface suggested. Sally now speaks about those days with a softness that hints at years of silence finally lifting. At 79, she has chosen to share what it meant to work beside someone whose laughter lit up rooms, even as he wrestled with shadows he rarely allowed anyone to witness. He was constantly brilliant, constantly moving, constantly performing, Field revealed in a recent intimate conversation about her former co-star. She remembers how he filled every corner of the set with energy, chasing humor as if it were oxygen. Yet in rare still moments, she caught a flicker in his eyes that told a different story. Those brief glances stripped away the persona and exposed a loneliness that hit her with unexpected force every time it appeared. What Field has shared isn't the typical Hollywood tell-all filled with scandalous revelations or petty grievances. Her words form a portrait of an artist whose talent dazzled the world while his heart carried burdens no one fully understood. She cared for him deeply, not in a romantic way, but in the kind of quiet bond that grows between people who sense each other's wounds. Robin couldn't stop, Field explained, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and lingering sadness. He couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop performing, couldn't stop making everyone around him happy, because I think if he stopped even for a moment, something dark might catch up to him. And I think he knew that long before any of the rest of us did. In the years since Williams' tragic death by suicide in 2014, many who worked with him have shared stories celebrating his kindness and spontaneous humor. Sally Field has added a layer few others could offer, shaped by moments when she watched the energy fade from his face and glimpsed the fragile person beneath the whirlwind. Her memories now carry the weight of time, allowing her to speak with a tenderness shaped by loss. She recalls a man whose light was immense, yet whose quiet moments revealed something far more delicate than the world imagined. But Field's perspective offers something deeper. The observations of someone who saw past the dazzling comedic mask to the complex, vulnerable human beneath her insights, shared now with the wisdom of her years, reveal not just who Robin Williams was as a performer, but who he was in those rare moments when the performance stopped, and why those glimpses were both beautiful and heartbreaking. Today we explore the extraordinary bond between these two legendary actors, a relationship built on mutual respect, creative brilliance, and a shared understanding of the human heart that made their on-screen partnership so magical and their off-screen connection so profound. Sally Fields. Reflections on Robin Williams reveal far more than just another Hollywood working relationship. Her words feel like a doorway into a truth that sat quietly between them, a truth shaped by trust, admiration, and an understanding that did not need to be spoken aloud. Through her eyes, we glimpse the extraordinary complexity of a man whose public persona as the world's most spontaneous comedian often concealed deeper truths about his inner life. What makes Field's perspective particularly valuable is her rare combination of emotional intelligence and absolute honesty. Those qualities let her notice what others overlooked, and her willingness to revisit those memories now offers clarity wrapped in compassion. Qualities that allowed her to see aspects of Williams that others missed, and to speak about them now with both compassion and clarity. As one of America's most respected actresses, Field has always brought authenticity to both her performances and her public statements. Her willingness to now share these more nuanced observations about Williams offers us a chance to understand not just a beloved comedian, but the human cost of brilliant creative gifts and the often invisible struggles behind the most radiant smiles. Poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive beneath the laughter. She loved him deeply, but he was hard to be around. When Sally Field first crossed paths with Robin Williams on the set of Mrs. Doubtfire in 1993, She understood she was partnering with someone whose talent carried a force unlike anyone else. What she did not expect was the emotional landscape that would grow between them, a connection filled with admiration yet shaped by the difficulty of keeping pace with a mind that never seemed to rest. What she couldn't have anticipated was the complex, sometimes challenging dynamic that would develop between them. Their bond was grounded in respect, but she often felt the strain of keeping up with someone who operated at a speed few could match. "I loved Robin, I truly did," Field has reflected in recent interviews. That affection did not erase the moments when his intensity became overwhelming, not from cruelty, but from the sheer force of his presence. But that doesn't mean he was always easy to be around. Not because he was mean or difficult in the ways people sometimes are in Hollywood. It was because his energy was so intense, so constant, that it could be exhausting just to be in his orbit. According to Field, Williams' legendary improvisation was not just a performance style. It was simply how he moved through life. Even between takes or during quiet breaks, he flowed in and out of characters with a momentum that never slowed. Even when cameras weren't rolling between takes, during lunch breaks, or in quiet moments that might have allowed for normal conversation, Williams remained in perpetual motion, riffing, joking, shifting between voices and characters with barely a pause for breath. He couldn't not perform, Field explained. She remembered meals where he slipped into a dozen personas in minutes, each one sharp and funny. The room erupted with laughter, yet she sometimes wished he could simply sit with her in silence. He couldn't not perform, Field explained. We'd be sitting there having lunch, and Robin would become 15 different people in the space of 5 minutes. A British aristocrat, then a Russian immigrant, then a football coach. Everyone around would be laughing. But there were moments I wanted to say, "Robin, we're just having soup. You can just be Robin for a while." With her sensitivity, she sensed that his constant motion came from a place deeper than humor, a way of holding back something he feared. "You can just be Robin for what Field recognized with the emotional intelligence that has always characterized her own work was that Williams' constant performance wasn't simply about entertaining those around him. Looking back now, she sees how performing felt essential for him, almost like a lifeline. If he stopped, even briefly, something heavier might rush into the quiet. Many who worked beside him came to understand that his wild creativity was both authentic and also a shield from pain he carried alone. And I think that something else terrified him. This insight touches on what many who worked closely with Williams eventually came to understand, that his frenetic creative energy, while genuine and often joyful, also served as a kind of shield against darker emotions that he struggled to manage. Director Chris Columbus, who worked with both Field and Williams on Mrs. Doubtfire, affirmed her experiences, recalling those brief seconds when Robin looked as if he had stepped outside himself. Worked with both Field and Williams on Mrs. Doubtfire has corroborated Field's observations, noting that Robin had this extraordinary ability to be completely present and giving to everyone around him. But sometimes you'd catch this look in his eye just for a second, like he was watching himself perform, almost separate from the moment. Field's perspective is particularly valuable because she approached Williams not just as a fan or casual colleague, but as a serious actor with her own considerable gifts. He was brilliant, yes, but he was also in pain, Field said. And I knew it. Even when many people couldn't see past the laughter, there was a sadness there, a vulnerability that he protected fiercely. Sometimes, the more wildly he performed, the more I sensed he was keeping something at bay. This duality created a unique dynamic between the two actors, one that felt both magnetic and complicated, shaped by moments when joy and sorrow seemed to live side by side inside him. Field, known for her emotional directness both on screen and off, found herself drawn to Williams' brilliance while sometimes struggling with his inability to simply be present without the protective layer of performance. There were rare moments, very rare, when the machinery would stop, she recalled, when he would sit still long enough for his expression to settle. In those quiet pauses, his eyes held a depth that suggested he understood far more than he ever let on. Those moments of connection were precious, but they never lasted long. It was like he couldn't bear that kind of naked presence for more than a few seconds before the need to perform would take over again. Field describes a man caught between the wild force of his talent and the gentleness he rarely showed. The picture she offers is of someone whose brilliance came wrapped in fragile edges, a person who carried his gifts and his hurt with the same intensity. The picture Field paints is not of the one-dimensional comic genius that the public often saw, but of a far more complex human being, someone whose extraordinary talents came intertwined with equally extraordinary sensitivities. Her love for Williams was genuine and deep, but it was a love that acknowledged both his gifts and his struggles, his brilliance and his pain. She understood that being close to him meant accepting the constant motion that defined his inner world. Her love for Williams was genuine and deep, but it was a love that acknowledged both his gifts and his struggles, his brilliance and his pain. Being around Robin was sometimes like being in the presence of some force of nature. Field reflected, exhilarating, unpredictable, occasionally overwhelming. After talking with him, she often felt both energized and drained, as if she had stepped into the center of a storm that carried beauty and chaos in equal measure. You'd leave a conversation with him, feeling like you'd experienced something rare and special, but also sometimes a bit like you'd been through a hurricane, and you'd wonder, how does he live inside that brilliant mind all the time? With no break, no rest. How exhausting must that be? This question stayed with her long after filming ended, lingering like an echo she never fully resolved, a reminder of how heavy that kind of brilliance could feel. This question, how Williams experienced his own extraordinary consciousness, is one that Field has revisited often since his death, understanding perhaps better than most the toll that such relentless mental activity might take. "I loved him," she said simply. But sometimes loving someone means seeing their pain, even when they're doing everything possible to hide it from the world, and maybe even from themselves. Her words carry a truth shaped by years of watching him battle storms he never named. And we all have a great need for acceptance. But you must trust that your beliefs are unique, your own, even though others may think them odd. The empathy behind the comedy, he was a master of understanding others. While Robin Williams' manic energy and constant performance could sometimes be overwhelming, Sally Field has revealed another quieter aspect of his character, one that offered a deeper insight into the way he cared. His extraordinary capacity for empathy and his ability to notice and respond to the emotional needs of others, often without a word being spoken. Robin had this almost supernatural ability to read people, Field explained in a conversation about their time working together. He could walk into a room and instantly sense who was struggling, who needed a lift, who was carrying unspoken weight. Without fanfare, he shifted himself to match what they needed. Robin had this almost supernatural ability to read people, Field explained in a conversation about their time working together. He could walk into a room and instantly sense who was having a hard day, who needed cheering up, who might be struggling with something they weren't talking about. And he would adjust everything about himself to give that person exactly what they needed in that moment. It was instinctive, almost like a gift he never spoke of. This emotional intelligence manifested in ways that often had nothing to do with comedy. According to Field, some of Williams' most meaningful moments of connection happened not during his famous improvisational riffs, but in small, quiet gestures that revealed how carefully he observed the people around him. These were moments when he seemed to set aside the comedy long enough to simply care, with a gentle awareness that surprised those who knew only his loudest brilliance. "I was going through a difficult personal time during part of the filming," Field recalled. "I hadn't told anyone on set about it. I am very private that way, and I've always believed in keeping my personal struggles separate from my work, but somehow Robin knew. He sensed the heaviness she carried even when she tried to hide it. Without pressing or asking questions, he found ways to ease her days without drawing attention. He never said, 'I am here for you.' He just was," Field said. "He would bring me a cup of coffee exactly how I liked it without me having to ask. He would place himself between me and people who might drain my energy on fragile days. Once, seeing she was barely holding herself together, He created a distraction by spilling water on himself, letting her breathe during the pause that followed. Not obviously. Just enough that we had to take a short break while he dried off. And in that break, he gave me the few minutes I needed to compose myself. These weren't grand gestures designed to draw attention to his kindness. According to Field, they were almost surreptitious, small acts of protection and care that she sometimes only recognized in retrospect. Robin didn't help people to be seen helping them, she explained. He did it in these almost invisible ways. He was like a stealth emotional supporter, slipping in, doing what was needed, and then deflecting any thanks with a joke. This stood in sharp contrast to the version of him the public adored, the performer who filled every space with noise and light. In private moments, he carried a quieter strength, one rooted in noticing what others needed long before they said a word. In these private moments of empathy, he revealed a very different quality, an ability to step back, observe, and serve someone else's emotional needs without requiring recognition or gratitude. The director Chris Columbus has confirmed this quality, noting that Robin had this extraordinary ability to sense when someone on set was struggling. He adjusted his energy with care, dialing himself down when someone nearby seemed fragile, letting them breathe without being pulled into his ever-spinning orbit. There were times when he would deliberately tone down his performance energy if he felt it might be overwhelming to an actor who was having a vulnerable moment. He calibrated himself to what others needed, not just what would get the biggest laugh. Perhaps most revealing is Field's observation that Williams' empathy seemed connected to his own emotional struggles, that his sensitivity to others' pain came from understanding his own far too well. Looking back now, I think Robin understood others' pain so well because he carried so much of his own, Field reflected. He knew what it was to maintain a public face while dealing with private battles. And maybe that's why he was so careful with other people's vulnerabilities, because he knew exactly how precious and fragile our inner lives can be. She saw in him someone who guarded others because he wished someone had guarded him in the same way. This deep empathy extended beyond his famous friends and colleagues to everyone he encountered. Numerous members of the Mrs. Doubtfire crew have shared stories of Williams' kindness, how he remembered details about their families, noticed when someone was having a difficult day, or used his influence to ensure every person on set felt valued. His generosity was not selective. It reached everyone, regardless of their role or status. He treated the production assistants with the same attention and care as he gave to Sally or me. Columbus recalled, "That's rare in this business." And it spoke to something fundamental about who Robin was beneath all the comedy and fame. For Field, this aspect of Williams' character wasn't separate from his comedic genius, but intimately tied to it. His comedy and his compassion came from the same place, the same deep observing mind. His ability to observe human behavior with such accuracy and insight fueled both his empathy and his comedy, two expressions of the same fundamental quality. The thing about Robin was that he noticed everything. She said, every little human detail, every flicker of emotion across someone's face, those observations became characters, voices, jokes, and also the quiet kindnesses he offered when someone needed support. He saw people with this incredible clarity, and it's also what made him such a profoundly compassionate person. He was watching, always watching, with these eyes that missed nothing. This combination of keen observation and deep compassion created moments of connection that Field has carried with her long after Williams' death. They became memories she returned to, reminders of someone who cared in ways most people never noticed. Small instances of being truly seen and understood by someone who, despite his own struggles, maintained this remarkable capacity to step outside himself and meet others exactly where they needed to be met. Robin never said, "I am here for you," Field repeated. He just was. And sometimes that's the greatest gift one person can give another. Not declarations or promises, but simply presence, attention, and understanding without judgment. His Robin. It's just so much fun. You never get bored ever. The darkness behind the light. After his death, she wasn't just sad, She was angry. When news of Robin Williams' suicide broke in August 2014, the world reacted with shock and profound sadness. The loss felt impossible, as if a source of joy had vanished without warning. Here was a man who had brought laughter to millions, whose warmth and humor had seemed so boundless, gone by his own hand. For many, the disconnect between Williams' public persona and the despair that drove him to take his life was almost impossible to reconcile. For Sally Field, however, the reaction was more complex. The grief was there, but it came mixed with another emotion she did not expect to feel. While she shared in the universal grief at losing such a bright spirit, she is admitted to another more difficult emotion that took her by surprise: anger. After his death, I wasn't just sad, I was angry. Field has acknowledged in reflections about Williams, not at Robin himself, never at him, but at the situation, because I saw it coming. She had sensed something underneath his humor that she could never fully reach. Not specifically what happened, but I saw the suffering. I saw the signs. And it felt like watching someone you care about deeply standing too close to a cliff edge and not being able to pull them back, no matter how hard you tried. This anger stemmed from Field's growing awareness during their time working together that Williams was struggling with demons far more serious than the public or even many in Hollywood understood. With the emotional intelligence that has always informed her work as an actress, Field had recognized patterns in Williams' behavior that suggested his frenetic energy and constant performance weren't simply expressions of boundless creativity, but sometimes functioned as coping mechanisms for deeper psychological distress. She had seen flashes of something fragile hidden beneath the humor, something she could not name at the time. If you knew him well, the jokes weren't always funny, Field explained. Sometimes they were shields. There were moments when his eyes would tell an entirely different story than his mouth. When the performance felt less like joy and more like survival, and those moments haunted me after he was gone, because they were clues I couldn't fully decipher until it was too late. She carried those memories like unanswered questions. What made Williams' suffering particularly difficult to address, according to Field and others who were close to him, was how skillfully he deflected concern. His quickness, his ability to turn any serious conversation toward humor, and his genuine concern for others' comfort often made it nearly impossible to engage him about his own well-being. He always managed to shift attention away from himself with remarkable precision. He was a master at making sure the spotlight never stayed on his pain for more than a second, Field recalled. If you expressed concern, he'd immediately crack a joke so perfectly timed, so brilliantly funny that you'd find yourself laughing instead of pursuing the conversation you'd intended to have. He could disarm worry with humor more effectively than anyone I've ever known. It was both his gift and his armor. This deflection wasn't manipulative or calculated in Field's view, but rather a deeply ingrained survival mechanism, one that Williams himself may not have fully recognized as a barrier to getting the help he needed. I don't think it was conscious. This way, he protected himself from other people's concern. She said it was just how he'd learned to be in the world. Keep moving, keep performing, never pause long enough to be exposed. Never let the mask slip for long enough that someone might see behind it and ask the questions he wasn't ready to answer. Field's anger after Williams' death was complicated by her understanding of the challenges he faced, including his struggles with addiction, depression, and, as was later revealed, the early stages of Lewy body dementia, a progressive neurological disease that can cause severe psychiatric symptoms alongside cognitive decline. When I learned about the Lewy body diagnosis, it brought a different dimension to my understanding, Field acknowledged. Here was this brilliant mind, this person whose intelligence and quickness were his defining qualities and his professional tools, facing a disease that attacks those very capacities. The terror of that, for someone like Robin, must have been overwhelming. This context made Field's anger even more complex, directed not at Williams himself, but at the cruel circumstances that had placed such a sensitive, brilliant person in a situation where he felt he had no escape from his suffering. Her anger was also self-directed, arising from the painful question of whether she or others might have somehow broken through his defenses and helped him find a different path. She carried that question quietly, as if replaying moments she wished she had understood more clearly at the time. The hardest thing to accept is that he was surrounded by people who loved him, who would have done anything to help him, she said. But loving someone doesn't mean you can save them. Sometimes love just means bearing witness to someone's pain when you can't take it away. In the years since William's death, Field has processed this grief through reflection on the joy and heartbreak of knowing someone whose brilliance came with deep vulnerability. I saw the masking. I saw the frantic energy. I saw the moments when he'd suddenly drop into sadness and pretend he was just tired, Field remembered. But seeing isn't the same as being able to help. And that's the hardest lesson of losing Robin. That sometimes all our love and awareness isn't enough to pull someone back from their darkest places. She spoke with a softness shaped by time, holding both regret and acceptance in the same breath. This perspective offers a window into not just Field's relationship with Williams, but the unique burden carried by those who recognize suffering in someone they care about, yet find themselves unable to intervene. It speaks to the ache of watching someone maintain a bright public face, one so convincing that even those closest to them hesitate to push deeper. For Field, that burden left marks that have stayed with her. The world lost a comedic genius, but those of us who knew him lost something else, too. Field reflected. We lost a person of extraordinary complexity and depth, someone who gave so much joy to others while carrying his own terrible battles. And there will always be that question. Could we have done more? Could I have done more? I don't know that there's ever an answer to that question that brings peace. Her voice carried the weight of that uncertainty. Oh, Daniel, our problems would be waiting for us right here when we got back. We'll move, and hopefully our problems won't follow us. Daniel, please don't. The truth finally told. He wasn't just a comic genius. He was deeply human. At the heart of Sally Field's reflections on Robin Williams lies a truth, both simple and profound. The talent that made him beloved was only part of who he was. Behind the dazzling talent that made him one of the most celebrated performers of his generation was a deeply sensitive human being whose emotional complexity often remained hidden from public view. That's the truth I wish more people understood about Robin Field. Has said, he wasn't just a comic genius. He was a wounded, sensitive, terrified man who made the whole world laugh because he was scared of what would happen if he stopped. This perspective offers a counterbalance to the simplified narratives that often emerged after Williams' death. Either the one-dimensional celebration of his brilliance or the reductive view that his suicide was simply the result of depression. The reality Field observed was far more layered, shaped by a mixture of strength, fear, generosity, and inner turmoil. He lived at an emotional depth few people ever reach. Robin's mind was like nothing I've ever encountered, she explained. The connections he could make, the speed with which he processed everything around him, it was almost supernatural. But that same quality that made him so brilliant also meant he experienced everything with an intensity that could be overwhelming. His mind rarely rested, always absorbing and responding. He felt the world at this amplified level that most of us can't even imagine. This heightened sensitivity, according to Field, gave Williams both his unique creative gifts and his unique burdens. His ability to observe and channel human behavior with such precision came from the same place as his deep empathy and emotional vulnerability. For Robin, there was no filter to soften the world. A mind that was perpetually open to the world around it, processing experiences with extraordinary depth and speed. I think that's why he could never really rest, Field reflected. His mind was always working, always making connections, always processing. It gave him his genius, but it also gave him very little peace. She saw this duality clearly in their time together. What Field has come to understand more clearly in the years since Williams' death is how deliberately he constructed his public persona to conceal the more vulnerable aspects of his nature, not out of inauthenticity, but as a form of self-protection, and perhaps as a gift to others. He hid his deepest fears behind the same brilliance that made him beloved worldwide. Robin knew what people wanted from him. They wanted the brilliance, the spontaneity, the larger-than-life personality that could fill a room with laughter within seconds, she said. And he gave that so generously, even when it cost him, even when I think he desperately needed to be able to just be quiet, to be still, to let himself be known in different ways. And this understanding has led Field to a deeper appreciation of the courage it took for Williams to continue bringing joy to others, even while fighting his own battles. Seeing his comedy not just as natural talent, but as a deliberate, sometimes difficult choice to transform his own pain into something that could heal others. He used to say that comedy was a kind of armor, Field recalled. But to her, it became clear that it was also an offering, a piece of himself he gave away, even when it cost him more than anyone realized. He used to say that comedy was a kind of armor, Field recalled. But I think it was more than that. I think it was also a gift he gave at his own expense. Sometimes he transformed whatever was hardest for him into something beautiful for everyone else. There's real nobility in that, even though it came at such a cost. As she reflected on their relationship over the years, she found herself cherishing not only the vibrant moments on set, but the rare pauses when the performance fell away, stopped, and a more vulnerable connection became possible. There were these moments, just glimpses really, when everything would get quiet and it'd see him, watching, listening, present in a different way. She remembered those were the times I felt I was seeing the real Robin, not the performer, but the person. In those quiet seconds, she sensed a depth he rarely let others witness, an awareness that came from a lifetime of feeling everything too strongly. And that person had such depth, such awareness. He understood things about the human heart that most people never grasp. These moments of authentic connection remain Field's most treasured memories of Williams. Not the spectacular improvisations or famous routines, but the quiet instances that revealed the man behind the whirlwind. Those were the fragments she held on to, pieces of truth she had learned to see between the jokes. That's the truth I finally understood about Robin. Field reflected that beneath all that brilliant light was someone who carried his own darkness with such courage, who gave so much joy while knowing so much pain, who made connection with millions through his performances, but sometimes struggled to connect as himself without the buffer of comedy between himself and the world. Her words reveal a tender understanding of someone who lived in two emotional worlds at once. In sharing these insights, Field isn't diminishing Williams' extraordinary legacy as a comedian and actor, but rather enriching our understanding of the complex, fully human person whose gifts came intertwined with genuine struggles. Her perspective offers a more complete picture of a man who was not simply a talent, but a sensitive soul navigating a world that often demanded more from him than he could sustain. She offers a portrait of someone whose brilliance carried a weight few could see. Robin Williams wasn't just a comic genius. He was a wounded, sensitive, terrified man who made the whole world laugh because he was scared of what would happen if he stopped. And Sally Field knew it. And she loved him for it. But like the rest of us, she couldn't save him. This truth that even love and understanding cannot always save those we care about from their deepest struggles forms the bittersweet core of Field's reflections, a reminder of love's power and its limits. It speaks to the limits of our ability to help those we love, even when we see their pain with perfect clarity. I knew him, the real him, not just the performer, at least in glimpses. Field said, and I loved who he truly was, with all his complexity and contradiction. But loving someone, really seeing them, doesn't mean you can fix what's broken or heal what hurts. It is an acceptance that often arrives painfully late. Sometimes love just means bearing witness, holding space for the whole truth of a person, their brilliance and their pain, their light and their darkness. In this honest acknowledgement of both connection and limitation lies perhaps the most profound truth Field has shared about her relationship with Williams. That genuine love involves accepting the full humanity of another person, including the parts we cannot.